Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tuesdays with Anne. Hi, Colleen. I'm just waiting for my counterparts to come on this evening. Tonight we have an exciting discussion. Oh, here's Lady Charmaine. All right, here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started momentarily. People are popping on.
Hello.
Hi, Lady Charmaine. How you doing?
I'm fine. How are
Oh,
you?
it's so great to see you.
Good to see you. I just got to get my camera adjusted a little bit.
Yeah,
How are you?
I'm doing well. We're just waiting for Cass to come in. Let's see here.
Looking great. I love your glasses.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I went back to the fun stuff. I'm like, if I got to wear this stuff every day, it's got to look fun at this point.
Yes, that's totally my opinion.
Yeah. All right. Just waiting for Cass and LaShawn. I see a lot of people coming on. It's great to see everyone tonight. Happy Tuesday. It was kind of a cold, rainy day here for us.
It was a beautiful day in New York.
Oh, was it? Oh, upstate New York. It was cold and rainy, and I went to my son's track meet after school, and it was just brutally cold. Holy cow.
Oh, you poor thing. It was so nice. I got on this nice top because it was so beautiful outside.
Oh, man. It's coming. It's coming this way. I can feel it.
I'll send it your way. I'll send you good thoughts.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We are just waiting a minute for our two friends here.
Mm-hmm.
We will do introductions, and we'll get rolling.
Okay.
Let's see here. All right, NAMI Capital Region's on. Oh, hi, it's Cass. Okay. Then I'm going to invite NAMI Capital Region, maybe here. I have no requests. There we go. I just invited you, Cass. Oop.
Hi.
Hello.
Running a little late today. Don't mind my wet hair.
No, just glad you're here. No worries.
How are you ladies doing?
Good.
Good. How are you?
Good. Busy
Can
time.
everybody-
Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yeah. Can everybody see people, or can you just see two?
3.
Oh, I only see 2 people on mine. So I can hear Cass, but I can't see her. Oh,
I see her.
there's LaShawn too. LaShawn, I just sent you an invite. You should get it.
Awesome.
All right, there we go. Okay.
Hello.
We are all together then, right?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Well, hello, beautiful ladies. I'm Anne, and I'm so thrilled that you were able to join us this evening to have an amazing conversation about women's mental health in the BIPOC population. This series of women's mental health discussion came to fruition after Shop Repurpose, which is one of our NAMI New York State sponsors for May's Mental Health Month, and for our year, actually, they're going to join us for Off the Mask. They called us, we were on a call, and they said, what are we missing? Like, what can we do for women? And I said, oh, well, this is what women are talking about in therapy. And I'm a therapist, and so I brought some ideas, and I'm so grateful that you all said you would join us tonight. I think this is such a great topic. So
Thank you.
in the spirit of this, if we all want to introduce ourselves, then I'm actually going to turn it over to Cass to, oh, here we go. I think she's coming live again. Is Cass in, or is she out? There she is. All right, now I see 4. For a while, I didn't see 4. So why don't we start? Lady Charmaine Day, why don't you go first, introduce yourself, then LaShawn, and then Cass, I'll turn it right over to you.
Okay. Hello, beautiful. My name is Lady Charmaine Day. I'm originally from Roosevelt, Long Island. Now I live in the Bronx with my husband, cat, and dog, Mia.
Well, my name is Dr. LaShawn Paul. I am a licensed clinical social worker and owner of Social Work Diva, an online provider of therapy for women centering Black women, clinical consulting, and also clinical supervision.
Hi, everyone.
New York, I should say,
Sorry.
really quickly.
I think I'm a little laggy, so I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You sound good.
Okay, good. So, hi, everyone. My name is Cassandra Ferrugia. I go by Cass. I am NAMI New York State's Associate Director of Communications and Outreach. I'm really glad to be here today. I've heard so much about you, Lady Charmaine. I'm really glad to finally meet you. And it's
Thank
always
you.
a
Glad to meet
pleasure
you.
to see LaShawn, who has been such a wonderful resource for us, especially with our multicultural committee and helping put on our series last year, focusing on BIPOC mental health, and her just leading such great, important conversations, especially in Black mental health, and sharing, some of her practice with us as well. So really glad to be here today representing NAMI New York State. Before we get started, I did just want to, take a moment to share our love, support, and condolences to everyone affected by, the violent hate crime that happened this weekend in Buffalo. We're keeping our Buffalo community in our hearts, and, please reach out if this has traumatized you and brought up things for you. NAMI and all of us here are here to support you. As our CEO said, right, this is a reminder that racism is a clear threat to public health, and we need to be doing everything we can to end this kind of violence. So really appropriate for us to be talking about this topic today. So thank you again, everyone watching and joining us today, for being here. I really just wanted to share some of what we're doing at NAMI New York State to support BIPOC mental health, and that, right now what we're working on currently is changing what was our multicultural committee to our DEI committee, and really looking at how do we make that more than a statement, but a practice in everything we do at NAMI New York State and throughout our affiliates, and just working on making sure that we are meeting all our communities, where they need us, finding out what's the best way for us to support them, making sure we're asking these questions and, coming through authentically in the work that we do. So, I just want to share that over in NAMI New York City, they are doing some great work that has really helped in revamping our NAMI Sharing Hopes program, which focuses on Black mental health and also in Latinx mental health, and, creating spaces for people who are part of these different communities to come together in a safe place to discuss, what's affecting their mental health and how communities can support each other. So really important work, and just revamping that and bringing that throughout our whole state, and making sure that's at the forefront of our mission. Looking for more ways to be more competent culturally, when it comes to people who've experienced interracial trauma, who, face different barriers to accessing mental health, and also barriers when it comes to language, right? And when it comes to accessing care as well. So that's some of the work that we are doing. We have a series that a campaign that we do every July that started last year, which is our BIPOC mental health series. So we're working on putting something together again, of course, for that, and promoting that on social media to better support our different communities throughout the state. So please look out for that as well. Our education conference and all of our wonderful model ambassadors who represent different communities at Off the Mass as well. So yeah, a little bit about me. I'm actually originally from the Bronx, so we'll have to talk about that later. I moved to Albany to actually start working at NAMI New York State 3 years ago. I'm a part of the Latinx community. I am Puerto Rican. I am a person living with multiple mental health conditions and a chronic medical condition that affects my mental health. So, I'm happy to be here today to share some of my lived experience, as well as just a mental health advocate. But I'd love to hear more about the different work both of you ladies do in mental health advocacy and you do over at Social Work Diva. Sorry. Yes. Okay. Yes.
You got it. Don't
Okay.
worry.
Sorry. Long day.
Yeah, let's feel. I'm surprised you remember all of that.
So yeah, why don't you get us started, Dr. LaShawn?
Just call me LaShawn. You know better than that. So for me right now, right, I share the same sentiments that you were saying in regard to racism being a threat to particularly mental health, right? Since this is the topic of the night and this is what NAMI really kind of focuses on. And I think that I am currently doing on Thursday a sister circle, right, for Mental Health Action Day, which is spearheaded by MTV Group. And it was so interesting because there was one person who didn't put their name on the ticket, right? And there was a heightened awareness in regards to, is this someone that has an issue that we call out like white supremacy in regards to mental health, or that we believe that racism isn't mental illness, right? And I think that when we talk about Black women and the things that we often have to all hold at the same time, right? Juggling our regular daily lives with regardless of whatever that may be, right? If that's like with doggies or with children, or if it's just taking care of yourself, because sometimes that's enough, right? And a big burden to sometimes bear. I think that one of the biggest challenges is oftentimes we're not necessarily seen as humans, right? In the backdrop of like that massacre that occurred, right? And oftentimes we're often having to take on like the strong Black women role. Every time I think that we kind of always center that anytime we talk about Black women's mental health, because there is a religious background, right? In regards to pride and strength. And oftentimes what happens is that we don't take the time to actually debrief, right? It was business as usual the next day, and we're expected to perform in the same type of way at a heightened awareness, right? But at the same time, we never take the time to debrief, to mourn, right? But to also even recognize and feel our true humanity through our emotions. So for Black women today, I honestly, right, want them to ultimately take a breather, to allow themselves to feel all the emotions and to release some of them with friends, colleagues, right? I was on the phone earlier today, and one of my friends who never breaks down broke down today. And she was like, well, I know that I'm supposed to be vulnerable, but I never really find the space. And I don't feel that people have the time for it. And oftentimes, no one really makes the time for Black women in that type of way and in that type of context. It's one of the reasons that I've always done the work that I've done, right? I lost a friend my senior year of high school to suicide. And it was very important to me because of the same stigma and shame that happens contemporarily, but even historically, right? Passed down from the dehumanization of individuals through enslavement, all the way to now where you just have to kind of push through in order to thrive. And as Black women are always kind of just going on as business as usual, oftentimes we say Black doesn't crack, but we feel it other ways, right? We'll feel it either through our health experiences, right? That either mimic the physical symptoms of mental illness, right? Through heart issues, through diabetes, through what we eat. And ultimately, it all kind of is in the backdrop of it is racism and systemic racism that affects us throughout our entire life. And ultimately learning how to effectively cope with something that is a part of one of your daily stressors. In addition to all of the other things that you have to bear becomes extremely challenging. And oftentimes and one of the things that we've done at NAMI, right, is trying to get the resources to match the need. We can always blame stigma, but access is always kind of never meeting the need. And the backdrop of adding the pandemic, right? As I talk to new clients and talk to individuals, they'll talk about like all these things and not really recognize what effect that the pandemic and the social isolation has, right? Especially being in New York City where the numbers are rising and things are like, what's going to happen next becomes extremely challenging for Black women to figure out our space and our footing, but also take up a space that we're worthy of. And I think that mental health, when we're talking about Black women particularly, since that's my topical area, it becomes extremely challenging to meet the need, right? I'm one person. I have like, I can't even count the amount of friends that I've referred to therapy this week, right? Oftentimes because we have to know when to tag in and also knowing when to ultimately releasing. For a lot of the Black women that I see, right, in therapy, some of the things that are continuously coming up, right, is some of that intergenerational trauma. I know that a part of like your notes was like, talk about the historical piece, right? So because we've been so focused or hyper focused, right, on survival in a society that hasn't been warm and welcoming to us, right? We've oftentimes just kind of pushed through in order as a survival technique, and ultimately have seen the ramifications of increased like predisposure to anxiety and depression, to just name a few. And oftentimes we aren't necessarily met by providers who look like us, and even some providers who look like us aren't necessarily welcoming to the softness that Black women deserve, right? And the full scope of what humanity is for other women, right? I saw like Tracy Yvonne Ford, one of my friends on here, and one of the things that she mentioned this week was the idea of strong, right? We don't talk of and use the word strong in front of any other woman except the Black woman. And the idea that you never hear of a strong white woman, you never hear of a strong Latinx woman, right? It's oftentimes only our very specific burden in order to necessarily carry, because we know oftentimes that there's normally not a space for us to decompress and for us to ultimately be able to experience the full depth of what humanity is. And I find that it has been extremely challenging, right? Doing the work to kind of eliminate stigma, when oftentimes I've sat in rooms and people would say, well, I've been to therapy, and let me tell you the horror stories, right? For a group that oftentimes people say never go to therapy, it's actually very shocking to hear some of the stories that they have, not only from white providers, but providers that sometimes look like them, right? That have internalized some of the racism and not really given us the space to be as soft and as vulnerable as other women have the opportunity to be. So as we sit here today, right, I challenge everyone that's listening, right, to hold up another Black woman, to create the space for them to be vulnerable and make the time, right? Oftentimes we don't have the time, and as in our societies, constantly always going, right? And making time for more than just, are you okay, right? But listening for the follow-up, right? And also asking more questions when you can tell something's off, when something isn't necessarily right, we know, but we don't often make space for that. So for me and my work, my hope is that I make space for Black women to have that warm space, right? So they can decompress, so they can unlearn, right? And redefine what strong is, right? In regards to professional mental health seeking. And also, someone in the chat is saying like they detest the strong for that reason, right? Because when I always use the analogy, right? It's so simple, like of a balloon. Oftentimes we blow into it, and we know, right? Because from experience to not blow too hard or too much and not release, because it'll pop. And oftentimes as humans, we don't know when that level is, right? When we'll break. And I think that for Black women, it's ultimately of spaces that need to be held for us, but also financially, right? Access needs to meet the need that we call them, right? We can't make it a personal responsibility to get into therapy and a personal responsibility to take care of themselves if the society hasn't necessarily made space to take care of us.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a lot
I
comes to
totally
mind. Sorry.
agree. I'm sorry. I just was going to say I totally agree
No,
with your
go ahead.
assessment. Thank you so much. It was it was a great overview and historical overview of the Black woman in society and the roles we've had to play. Not that we wanted to, not that we wanted to be strong, but because the situations and the circumstances forced us to be strong. And that's why you hear about the strong Black woman so much. So society has put us in that role. And at the same time, it's like, don't be strong. Don't be as strong as you are, okay? You get that message too. So very good. Thank you so much for that highlight.
I think that even what you brought up right now, right, is the hyper independence, right? So no one takes care of us, and then we're taught to kind of take care and then like be strong ourselves and kind of push through and do those sort of stuff. And then the hyper independence is frowned upon, right? That you're angry, that you don't necessarily, you aren't vulnerable or you aren't soft, right? And no one knows how to approach you because they're intimidated by necessarily approaching you, or you're intimidating because usually they say you are, right? And I think that one of the challenges too, right, is for us to recognize that some of it is our responsibility too, right? Intergenerationally, we pass down those roles. And passing down those roles from, I have so many people that I come across, whether they're friends or clients, who say, I don't want to be a strong Black woman. They'll literally come to therapy and say that. But then they'll take on the responsibility of everything else because of the lack of boundaries, right? When knowing something is not yours and feeling, and it's really a heavy burden, right? To think that you are the person that has to carry the weight of an entire community because you're the pillar. And I think that oftentimes Black women feel if they don't do it, no one else will. And oftentimes that's true. But at the same time, we need to learn to delegate tasks in order to be well and ultimately practice self-care.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Lady Charmaine. Did you want to add anything else?
No,
Okay.
I was saying it was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I was just ranting and saying nonsense.
No.
No.
You know, I'll just speak from my personal experience that, you know, I am first generation college and first generation therapy as well. And, you know, having to navigate that all without having someone really to guide me and mentor me in those different ways definitely affected my mental health. And I think about, like, you know, figuring out how to understand my mental health conditions and not having the language because it wasn't a part of the culture, and thinking not like the strong Latina, but just like, you know, kind of just this kind of matriarchy where, you know, all the work goes onto you, and like you said, you always have to be strong, and you have to take care of everyone, and you have to make sure everything's okay. And, like, you know, having to raise my younger brothers and being a parent at a young age, and, you know, being a caregiver to my father when, you know, he was sick, and always having to be the one who takes on those roles. It's really, you know, it's very heavy. And, you know, so many other women of color take on those different things, and there's no time, like you say, like, when do I get to take a moment to cry or, like, show vulnerability or be weak? And it starts to be, I know for me, was so hard to finally talk about my mental health, because I always felt like I couldn't let there be a crack. I couldn't do that because so many people were depending on me. So I can definitely relate to those different aspects in that. And I know, you know, other people in my family as well. And it took other people in my family until I would start talking about my mental health for them to start questioning their own mental health and start having these conversations. And I know, just with other people and the young people I mentor, like, just people listening to my story has really helped them. And I'm, you know, working on finding my voice and how to use it to get other people to the place I'm in, where, like, I go to therapy, I'm on medication, I'm, you know, always looking for ways to help others start therapy if they don't have anyone in their family. It wasn't the norm there to do that. What does it look like when you're, you know, when you're anxious about starting something and you need help with your anxiety? Like, how does that look for different people? And, you know, how do you find someone who looks like you, who could relate to your socioeconomic background, you know, when they didn't have to be the first person in their family to go to college and have to struggle through that, or have to take care of children or different things like that. So, you know, just lots of intersection, you know, different intersecting identities with so many women of color, and all these different things, and how they affect our mental health. And hopefully this doesn't sound like I'm rambling, but just thinking, like, you know, when do we stop and think about, you know, these women who carry us and support them, and ask them when do they need help, when they always go along just being so strong all the time. You know, there's so much suffering that does go in silence. And, you know, I think about our conversation, the conversation Anne held last week about, people who are suffering with postpartum, and how much of that people suffer in silence because we don't talk about it, and there's that shame and thinking you're weak or not a good mother, and that's what women constantly face, just feeling we can't show weakness, we have to survive. And I know, LaShawn, in your work you always talk about thriving and like the difference. How do women of color thrive in their mental health? What can we do to support each other, right? Bring up each other and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely don't think you were ranting. I think that you hit a really good point in regards to being the first, right? So many of us are the first in various different roles, right? Oftentimes, especially if you come from a family of immigrants and those sort of things, a lot of either education or something had to give, right? Either they were spending some more time at work or whatever it was. While my children have me like 24 hours a day, except for like things like this, and then my therapy clients. That's it, right? But they're with me the entire time, and then have me immediately after school, which is completely different than I had, right? My grandma was the one that was around doing those sort of stuff, right? And I think that oftentimes too, when we look at being the first, there's a lot of burden that comes with being the first, right? We always talk about the excitement and the glass ceiling and those beautiful things, right? But being the first becomes extremely challenging. And I think that when you even add in like the maternal stuff that is currently happening, right? Beyond just maternal mental health, like just even looking at the formula crisis that's going on, right? Like I completely nursed my first son. My second son, I was on medication, couldn't, and now I have a 3-month-old now. That's probably why you haven't seen me in a while, Cass, right? And my 3-month-old, like last night, I had like my 18-month-old got into the can of formulas, like try to eat it. I'm like the last can, right? In this type of time. And like Facebook group is literally what I went into, and I was like, hey, anyone here? Like I'm getting some in 2 days. Like, can we either exchange? And someone was like, just come pick it up, right? Like I was like, okay, how do I pay you? Through Zelle, whatever. They're like, no, just come.
That's nice.
She gave me 2 cans and those sort of stuff. And I think, and I was like, I was on the phone. I was like a little bit like taken aback, because the truth of the matter is capitalism has never saved us. It's community that's always saved us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now that there's a shortage in regards to those sort of stuff, I think that when we think about how do we hold space for each other, it's in that type of way, right? You have a resource. I don't necessarily mind having a resource. Now I'll have a surplus and I can share that with someone else like in 2 days, right? And I think that, and even someone else was like, come to Jersey and come pick up 2 free cans, right? These are moms that are of various different races, right? The lady last night was a black woman. The lady in Jersey is a white woman, all saying, hey, you know what? We get it. Let's not have babies starve, while an entire system is kind of falling flat in front of our face. And I think that those things too matter for our mental health. Those are little stressors where we talk about, yeah, just breastfeed. I did that for years with my first and couldn't, right? And then now I'm supplementing. And I think that one of the things too is when we talk about with motherhood and when we talk about the additional challenges, it becomes extremely challenging when systems don't necessarily meet our needs. So oftentimes no one's saying, okay, you know what? They're saying, oh, something's up with her and the baby, and they're gossiping. They're not necessarily saying, hey, how can we help you? How can we support you? And if I can't support you, how can I get you the resources that can support you, right? Connecting you to a NAMI, connecting you to a therapist, doing those sort of stuff to sit in community with people is extremely valuable, right? For all of our well-being, regardless of what our racial dynamic is. And I think that the more that we begin to understand that is the more that ultimately mental health will be better, right? Oftentimes we are pushed and pushed in regards to self-care, and we can't do self-care in the backdrop of a society that doesn't allow you to even have time for those things. And I think that what will save us is really community care. And until we get to that place, right, as an individualized society, to move further away from thinking about the individual and the self, right? The people who are clearly hoarding formula, and that's why I didn't hoard. I was like, I'm not going to hoard. Silly me, didn't hoard, and I ended up without any, right? But I think that one of those things is it's important for us to find a way to necessarily be there more consistently for each other. The idea of checking in with people, right? Checking on your strong friend. Who cares if they're strong or not? Just check in. And I think that oftentimes we don't necessarily care for each other the way that we do. And then when things happen, we say, we could have done this differently. And I think that finding the time and finding the space, even when you are tired, be vulnerable with people and say, I'm tired and I'm feeling this way too. Because oftentimes we operate in these little small milieux and we are not telling each other what we're feeling. And honestly, that isolation keeps us further into mental illness and into depression or sadness. And ultimately, it's what prevents us from actually healing as a community.
Mm-hmm. I think what also helps us heal as a community is for more of us to share what's happened to us. And I wanted to share what happened to me in my 26-year journey with mental health because it resonates with so many other people that this happened to them too. Like when I was a little girl and I was growing up, my father and mother and sister and brother and I lived in a house in Roosevelt, Long Island. And my father was physically and mentally abusive towards me and my family. And then my mother and father got divorced when I was 5 years old. And my mother married my stepfather. And my stepfather repeatedly raped me and was mentally abusive towards me from ages 5 to 9. What hadn't been poked, prodded, or touched in any way was my brain. And early on, my teachers told me, they were like, Charmaine, you're smart. Go for that. And I did. I took care of my home. I took care of my sister and brother. I took care of my stepfather, and I got all A's and did well in school. But the kids in school were cruel and bullying me, and oftentimes they would call me nasty names and throw me in the snow if it was the winter, or throw me in the leaves if it was the fall. And I kept saying, God, please, I can't take no more. Please let this pay off. And it did. In my senior year, I was my senior class president, homecoming queen, yearbook editor, public announcer, and I graduated number 3 in my class, which was good enough to get me into Cornell University. At Cornell, I pledged Delta Sigma Theta. And at the time was spring 1991 when they changed the pledge process to no pledging activities. However, for 13 weeks, me and 12 other girls went through a pledge process. Nationals came in, suspended and fined the girls. They suspended and fined the chapter. And me and the 12 girls that pledged, we did not get our letters. So I pledged for 13 long, hard weeks. I felt suicidal for the first time, but I didn't act on it. I continued to do well. I got good grades, and I was also inducted into the Quill and Dagger Senior Honor Society, and I graduated on time. But my friends and my father and my father's family said they noticed that I was depressed. I'm like, girl, all you need is a man, he kept saying. A man will cheer you up and make you feel better. So they set me up on a blind date with a friend of the family whom asked to marry me 4 months after getting together. We got married a year and a half later, and I would say that that marriage was horrible. He was always treating me like I was nothing, and I felt like I was nothing. But because I was walking in that Black woman strong role, I didn't let anyone know, not my family, not my friends, not anyone I pledged with. I just kept it to myself until one day it imploded inside of me. And I started walking fast and talking fast and having speeding irrational thoughts like, hey, I'm Wonder Woman and I'm going to change the world. I went on my job where I worked in human resources. I called a meeting of all the secretaries. I told them, look, you're all incompetent and fired. They looked at me like, oh my God. Then I went to Columbia where I was working on my master's in organizational psychology. I told the teacher, sit down, shut up. I'm smarter than you, and I'm running the class today. He took one look at me. He said, something is wrong with you, Charmaine. He called my husband. My husband and family took me to the psych ward, where I stayed for 2 weeks. I was diagnosed with having bipolar disorder type 1. Those 2 weeks were the best hospitalization I ever had. I had a husband, I had family surrounded around me, but being diagnosed bipolar and being on medication that was wrong for me, I eventually lost my husband of 5 years, and I kept working as a human resources executive, taking on higher and bigger roles. And every time I took on a bigger role, I ended up in the psych ward again. I was in a psych ward for 10 times. Then when I came out the last time, I said, you know what? This is never going to happen to me again. I'm not going to be in human resources anymore. I'm going to do something that's fulfilling, uplifting, and nice for me, and that I believe in. So I became a pastor, and I started Unlimited Help online ministry. And everything was going great. Curtis Blow Walker had asked me to be the head of Hip Hop Church. I was doing a consulting job for Head Start, working with little kids, and I was very happy. And I was so happy that I couldn't sleep for 3 days. And next thing I know, I was thinking I was a queen of Egypt. And I walked down several city blocks, butt naked, with just a wig on my head and slippers on my feet. And I walked into my favorite restaurant and I told everyone there, hello, get out. I'm the queen of Egypt. Build me a pyramid. And thank God people who knew me were there. They called the police. They called the ambulance, and I was hospitalized again. One thing people didn't talk about back then was that there was a chance of relapse, even if you are on medication. And that's what happened to me. I had to start from the beginning because what I did was all over social media, because that was 2009. People heard about me and disowned me from groups, and it was like, okay, everything came crashing down. And as everything came crashing down, I lost my place with the Hip Hop Church and my job with consulting. I said, I'm a pastor, and I'm going to love and like me and treat me well during this time. And I'm going to get my ministry stronger. And I'm going to show people that you can come from anything and come back. And I was consistent, and I showed up. And for that, I joined NAMI to get help with my mental illness, and everything changed for the better. I started working with Unlimited Help Online Ministry through my website, LadyCharmaineDay.com, through an app called the Lady Charmaine Day app, and through social media. And now my ministry is over 35,000 people.
Wow.
Yes, God is good. What I do to stay well, because it's hard being a Black woman getting treatment for mental illness. Do I have a witness? All right. Because it's hard. And I didn't get the right treatment for 15 years. So during that time, I suffered from severe side effects, including my heart stopping 4 times. I had severe seizures. I went up to 215 pounds, down to 100 pounds. But finally, they got my medicine correct, and that consists of me taking an antipsychotic, an anti-anxiety, and an antidepressant. I see my therapist once every month, and I see my psychiatrist twice a month during the pandemic, because they really want to come around me and support me because of the pandemic. I also check in every single day with my family and friends. And there's a saying that goes, it takes a village to raise one child. Well, I believe sometimes it takes a village to help support one adult be sane and stable. And hello, that's what works for me. They finally got my medicine correct. I finally got the right treatment team after searching for a psychiatrist who specialized in both women and childhood trauma. I found a woman who graduated from a college in Russia and came to the United States, and that's what she specializes in. And my therapist specializes in business. Since I do such things that are not normal for anyone, but let alone someone with a mental illness, I needed someone who could believe in me and what I could achieve. And my therapist does that for me. The other things I do to stay well, I have learned to love and like me. After being a victim of so much drama and abuse, I didn't like myself. I hated myself. So it took a lot of treatment and therapy with a good therapist that I have for her to show me reasons to love and like me. And the number one reason I found to love and like me is that God loves and like me. And if God could love and like me, and it says so in the Bible, then I could love and like me too. And then I started loving and liking me and starting a collection of African-American Barbie dolls to have positive images around me. And I guess Barbie, after 25 years of me collecting, heard about me doing it because they got a Barbie doll that looks just like me now.
Oh my
Awesome.
God.
What else I do too well? I practice forgiveness. I've forgiven everyone who's done something wrong to me, and by doing so, I feel at peace and grounded. I also exercise and eat healthy. Remember, I told you I went up to 215 pounds? Well, by eating healthy and exercising, I have lost and kept off for the last 9 years 80 pounds. Praise God. I also make my home my own heaven on earth. It's a very tranquil and a very peaceful place. It's also a place where I light candles and burn incense. And it used to be purple, yellow, blue, green, and pink. But my landlord came in 2019 and painted the whole apartment white. So it really feels like heaven on earth now. And the last two things I do to stay well, I practice acupuncture. It helps with the arthritis in my knees, the arthritis in my hands, and the bipolar in my head. And I also practice spirituality. Besides being a pastor, I also read my Bible every single day and I pray every single day. And by doing so, I feel connected to God and able to cope.
That's absolutely awesome.
Thank
You
you.
touched on so many different things, right?
Yes,
So, one, thank you for sticking with, right, your treatment.
thank you.
Oftentimes it becomes extremely frustrating, and often people get frustrated and then don't necessarily seek the correct treatment. I also love the fact that
Thank
you
you.
use, right, the spirituality that always comes up as a strong Black woman piece, right, in order to switch it and say, I can have God and I can have a therapist. They don't necessarily, they don't contradict each other.
They
And I
don't.
think that times, right, that in our community we have conversations and say, pretend that it does, right, and it limits us from wanting to necessarily seek treatment, and having effective professional treatment is ultimately the way to go. And I'm so happy that you found a holistic approach, right? One of the things that I always have my clients do when they create like this self-care plan is to really focus on what do they need to take care of their mind, right? Their body, also their spirit,
Yeah,
right? And I think that ultimately, if we try to think more holistically, we will all be better off if we were to have making the time to just even take a time out, whether that is for meditation or just breathing, right? And just allowing us to be more mindful in the moment, but also recognizing for some people, right? Self-care is medication. Self-care is therapy. Self-care is all of those things that oftentimes we don't talk about in our community, and it's a necessity.
it's true. And it's so vital to get the right care. I can't stress that enough. Even though it took me a long time, it was worth it. Even though I had side effects, it was worth it. Once I got on the right treatment, I felt like myself again. I felt good. I felt like I could contribute to society. I started thinking things that I hadn't thought in years because my mind was in the wrong medication and I couldn't think. And I started writing, and now I'm an author of 8 books. One
Oh,
book,
awesome. Ghost
yes,
write one for me.
one book is called Size 7.5, Walk a Mile in My Shoes. It talks about my journey with bipolar disorder and all the things that happened. Another book that I wrote is called Heed Simple. It talks about the next 5 years from 35 to 40 when I found the right treatment and also I became married. And my last book that I wrote was called Lady Day's Pearls of Wisdom. What I have learned is how to take care of myself. And those are pearls that were taught to me by people who really cared. And I've taken all those pearls they gave me and the pearls I created myself. And I made this book that talks about happiness, how to get it, how to keep it, peace of mind, how to get it, how to have it, healthy lifestyle, love and romance. And I'm proud of myself being in Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play Store, and iTunes.
I love the fact that you said so many people poured into you, right? To
Yeah,
kind of circle to that idea of necessary community,
Yeah.
whether it was the teachers and allowing the, and a lot of people planting the negative stuff, right? I often ask women sometimes when they say all this negative self-talk, who taught you that, right? We're not born thinking these negative things about ourselves and about our place in society as Black women, right? We see and witness and experience that as we go through, right? Or watch other people who've taught and embedded things in our own head. And I think necessarily our work also just begins in our own head, right?
Yeah.
That kind of fight to take out throw out some of the negative stuff, or not even if you can't throw them out, to say not right now, pause it and kind of move past it. And I think that those are important pieces for us to recognize that as much as we can love our community, right? As much as we can love everyone around us, right? Our children, our friends, our family, it's important for us to necessarily love ourselves and to get rid of some of the internalization of that negative talk that we've internalized from children as we even moved into adulthood.
It's
Yeah.
true. And not only to love yourself, but to, once you love yourself enough to spend time with that person who loves you most. And I'm so proud that my high school sweetheart contacted me on Facebook in 2010, and we got married, and we've been married happily for 12 years. It's nothing like having somebody who believes in you in your corner. And I really suggest a healthy relationship for anybody so that you can maintain your mental thoughts, your spirit, as well as your physical well-being.
I agree and kind of disagree, right?
Okay.
So I'm firm on having necessarily a relationship that has supportive spouses and those sort of stuff. But support doesn't necessarily have to come from a romantic relationship, right?
True.
Support can be alongside for friends or those sort of stuff, and making sure that our circle is a loving space and not a space that we can be soft and a space that we can be supported, right? Even when you said your therapist, that's clearly a relationship. That's a very safe space for you that you're like, she believes in me. She believes in my business and those sort of stuff. And I think that oftentimes we give Black women and women pressure, right, in order to maintain relationships. And if they don't have one, then they're flawed, right? And even as I heard you speak about your relationships, you're like, some of it I blame my mental health and why it destroyed those sort of things. And yes, some of those things are true, but some of it too, like even you mentioned your ex-husband, it seemed like it wasn't a healthy space anyway,
No, it
right?
wasn't.
And it was a space that you needed to get rid of in order
Right.
to find people who actually loved and nurtured you. And I think that for me and for what I want anyone who possibly listens to this to necessarily recognize that love is infinite and love can look like a lot of different things, right? It's about making sure in order to find that support and for that community, choosing people who choose you, right? And who not only that they choose you, they choose to want to help you, right? Become better because they believe in you, and they also become that person or those people, right? That you can relay some of your thoughts and your hopes, your dreams, and your fantasies on, right? Oftentimes we're not necessarily given that space, and oftentimes we're cut down by society. But as women of color, it's important for us to necessarily recognize that we can be a lot of things that we were told we couldn't, right? And community will ultimately help us get past that finish line.
Well, I totally agree with you in that a village supports one adult. It really does. It takes the work of your therapist, your psychiatrist, your pharmacist, your acupuncturist, your OBGYN, or for men, whatever that doctor is. But having all those primary care doctors talking to each other and being a team along with your family is very important. And the reason why I brought up a relationship and I stress that as a way of being a good way to have a life is because so many people who have a mental illness think that they are not lovable. They think, oh, I have a mental illness. Who's going to love me? Who's going to be with me? And I'm here to share with you, you are lovable. You are special. And God will give you someone who will love and see you for who you are, not a mental illness.
Thank you. I also want to add, I think about like, our culture of it being more individual, but like so many of our communities being more collective, and like you both brought in like how it does take a village and how, we do get support and love in different ways. And one way, we didn't mention, which is something that's really important to me, is kind of connecting with other living things, like thinking about, you know, the earth. And, you know, I'm a big fan of plants, and I get so much from, you know, working on those things. Or like our pets, you know, my dog is my emotional support animal, and I really appreciate that relationship. And this weekend I was away and I missed him so much. And, you know, like to other people, it can seem silly, but like these are the relationships that are really nourishing in my life, and I really appreciate them. I am also single, and so, you know, I do get so much of my support from my close friends, and I appreciate them so much. And, you know, we have intimacy in different ways, right? And, you know, looking at the ways we have connection into, you know, in different ways, and how we get support and nourishment from different people is, I think, really important, especially for those people who aren't seeking a relationship or who don't desire relationships in that way. So, you know, if you're like that as well, you are worth loving from any of those sources you receive love from, including, you know, yourself, the love you give yourself, which I think is so important. And for some of us, like myself, is a journey that I'm still on and can always improve and grow from. I also wanted to go back and talk about, you know, you mentioned, you know, how we talk to ourselves and the way we hear other people talk to us, and also, you know, coming with a kindness to thinking about, right, that for them, that's also their intergenerational trauma, right? They weren't the source of that. And it's something that comes down and down and down. And, you know, having that, you know, acknowledging that, and it can change your perspective. I know sometimes our relationships with our parents or our grandparents, they can be hard. And when we talk about religion, I know sometimes my mom will be like, oh, just pray on it. And it's like, for me, like, listen, it's not going to be enough for me to pray on it. I need to go take my antidepressant pills. Like, I need to pop a antidepressant, you know, an anxiety med. I am going through it right now. Praying on it is not always going to help me, but sometimes it does. You know, and what other ways people find spirituality, whether that's meditating or practicing yoga, seeking community in different ways. You know, just finding different sources to find, you know, what you need, right? And the best way to do that, and how self-care looks, and the people that you can trust, whether it's your pastor, your spiritual leader, right? The support of friends and family. I'm not sure where I was going with this, sorry. Hopefully that all made sense.
I think you wanted to circle back to like the idea of how we talk to ourselves,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And even though you mentioned like it did those type of thoughts and those the way that we talk to each other, right? Does come from either our family or whatever agent of socialization, right? And but as an adult, it's not an excuse anymore, right? It's our role and our job to heal so we don't bleed on others who never cut us, right? And I think that ultimately one of the ways that we do that is to find people who are always continuously growing, right? Don't necessarily get complacent with a friend that's always been the same, right? Find and reach out to new people and create new relationships that ultimately support you and where you're going, right? Because I don't necessarily want to be around people who talk like maybe my mother, right? I want to be around people who allow me to necessarily be vulnerable and allow me to feel good about myself, right? And I think that when we talk about the way that what we've internalized and the things that we've heard, right? I often do an activity with people that surrounds like compassion for ourselves, right? That oftentimes we don't give ourselves compassion and the grace that we extend to others, right? And sometimes the excuse, right? That, oh, they were raised that way. They were these sort of stuff. But for us, what's wrong with me? Why am I this way, right? And I think that one of the things that we as women of color, right, need to ultimately understand is yes, were raised a certain way. And this goes for anyone, honestly. Yes, people were raised a certain way, but that's not who I want in my space. And it's okay for me to end a relationship that no longer serves me, right? Getting up from that table is a very vital piece, right, for our own existence and our own well-being, because we need to be around people that don't necessarily see us as the person of the past, right? I've had to even not talk to family members as a result of that. Like, they could only see me as 19-year-old LaShawn, like, that's not me anymore, right? That person's dead. Who you're talking about doesn't even exist anymore. And I think that recognizing and finding community, right? Or people around you or support, and it can look like various different stuff. I have people who are like mentors, right? That have poured into me and allowed me to pour into others because I've gotten overflow, right? And I think that one of the things, and I understand the challenging piece, is also for us to realize that our energy isn't this infinite thing, right? That we need to recognize the importance of rest, right? And taking a break. Because ultimately, we don't necessarily take those things, and society doesn't normally make a space for it. So we have to carve out the space in order to necessarily be well, not only mentally, but physically as well, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, we operate on E, and we need to ultimately get to a space that we recognize that we are deserving of rest, since oftentimes, like, you can look at mothers, grandmothers, and other people who've never taken that opportunity, and you don't want to be who they are, right?
And that's
You want to
why
be
I think it's so important to love and like yourself and to treat yourself best and to invest in yourself and to find those mentors and people, that village for yourself. And the last thing I want to say that's very important is finding people who have the same interests that you do. And there's no other place that I know that I feel more at home than with my NAMI New York City Metro family. They are so loving, kind, uplifting, nurturing, helpful people. And by finding a place to volunteer and help helps me feel better about myself and keeps me stable. And it also keeps me connected to my village. And my village is NAMI New York City Metro. I have my BFF. I want to thank my mentors who are there for me, Linda Michelle Barron and Jeff Pullen. Those people took the time when no one else did. And so that's very important too. Thank you.
So I want to
I don't use that as a commercial. I don't know what they're going to do, right? That's a commercial.
I'm definitely going to take Metro or the chapters. So I guess we lost Cass, but I am here, and I step back from the conversation with respect that I am not an expert in BIPOC care, and I'm not a part of that population. But at the same time, I do have a question. We always try to take some questions. My first question is, what do you need from me? How do I support your community, this community, and lift you up and help as a helper? What do you think?
For me, right, the big thing that always happens when I'm doing events and all those sort of stuff is sponsorships and resources, right? Whether that is physical resources in regards to space, right? Human capital in regards to volunteering and doing those sort of stuff to necessarily sit alongside us as we do the work. And then the other piece of it, the resource, honestly, truly, is the finances in order to necessarily fund that, those type of events, those type of conversations. I think those are necessarily important pieces in order to make sure that we are able to serve the community in the way that we need to, right? Even conversations and those sort of stuff, but even building scholarships to create more Black female therapists, right? So Black women can have therapists who look like them is extremely vital and important. And I also think that in regards to just in your general regular life, right? The way that you hold space is checking in, right? Recognizing and not being afraid of conversations about racism, not being afraid to kind of talk about the elephant in the room that significantly has its feet on the necks of Black women, right? To hold space for them and to also make sure that you are a person that helps guide and direct, right? Especially since you are someone who's a therapist and have those resources at your avail to do those type of connections and ultimately offer resources also.
And I think what you're doing with having conversations like today, bringing all of us together to talk about mental health illness, mental health issues, mental health questions, is the right thing to do at this time, and it's needed. It's needed, and so much more is needed. We need to have more conversations. We have to need more enlightenment to get people to learn and grow, or else people are going to stagnate. And if you don't have the information, how will you know? So thank you for providing this opportunity.
Absolutely. I think that's a significant resource, right?
Yes.
Mental health is very important. And without the knowledge to even recognize mental illness, right? You're saying
Mhm.
people were telling you and you didn't know, without those type of educational opportunities, right? But also to get into spaces that people of color are, right? So that we're Black women are, where Latinx women are, in order to be there in that space and provide resources and communities that are where they're actually located and not necessarily in spaces that they have to find us.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And it sounds like this platform, the NAMI platform, is going to embrace July, right? Is that what Cass was saying as far as July and having more conversations about BIPOC mental health, right?
Yes.
I'm thrilled about that. And I think, you know, I took a lot of notes today from what you said, and I've studied and I've been a counselor for 17 years, and I try. My kids are biracial, and so it's something very interesting to have three biracial children, but I am not biracial, right? And so it's an interesting thing to live this way, right? And so introducing people, being in communities, like we do that, but it's different than doing this work specifically and talking about mental health within this community. And so I really am grateful to you ladies with what you talked about today. And I appreciate, I think that Cass shared that our executive director said racism is a clear threat to mental health, period. I think we need to emphasize that. LaShawn, you gave some advice about Black women being allowed and encouraged to take a breather. That's definitely a lesson I am taking with me. Really understanding generational trauma. Man, this is a tough one for a lot of people to really appreciate unless you do your research and get in there, understand any piece of this. People who've never experienced it don't get it, right? And so this is something that if people are obliged, please like do a little research. You can go on YouTube. I watched a TED Talk earlier from Jalan Agnew. I mean, it's a 9-minute TED Talk, and it was brilliant. And it was about, you know, that generational trauma. And I think that we need to get past survival, right? And we need to get to this community that we're talking about where we just love each other for being each other, right? And when
Sure.
we pick each other up. So you ladies are beautiful, and I am so grateful and humbled that you were able to join us tonight. And Cass, you too. I see you're trying, and it's okay. No worries. These things happen. You know, this is the first series NAMI has ever had on Instagram Live, and we are hoping to break that mold and start more conversations here live with all sorts of people and, you know, talking about things. So once again, ladies, thank you so much. I wish you both well. And
Thank you.
love.
Same to you,
Right.
man. Thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.